Hello and welcome to Making Media Now, the Filmmakers Collaborative podcast. I'm your host, Michael Azevedo. I'm joined on this episode by first-time director Vivien Hillgrove and producer Deann Borshay Liem to discuss a truly engaging and poignant personal documentary called Vivien's Wild Ride, which will premiere on PBS on January 26th. Vivien Hillgrove has been a film and sound editor for decades. She's worked with many filmmaking greats, including Francis Ford Coppola, Phillip Kaufman, Milos Forman, and Walter Murch, along with a who's who of celebrated documentary filmmakers. When Vivien's eyesight starts to deteriorate, the shame and loneliness she felt in 1964 when she was forced to relinquish her baby as a teenage unwed mother, at a time when there were few choices for women, was a loss that resonated throughout her life. Now she faces a new feeling of isolation and loss. Recalling her resilience as a young woman, Vivien summons it anew and reinvents herself as a person with a new way of being and seeing, as an artist with a disability. Here's the film's trailer.
As a film editor, every little detail on the screen is important to me. And then after decades, the ophthalmologist said, "You're losing your central vision." My sight. There's no cure. I can't give up this trying to see. Who am I without the visual world?
Making Media Now is sponsored by Filmmakers Collaborative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting media makers from across the creative spectrum. From providing fiscal sponsorship to presenting an array of informative and educational programs, Filmmakers Collaborative supports creatives at every step in their journey. To learn more, visit filmmakerscollab.org. Hello and welcome to Making Media Now, to Vivien Hillgrove and to Deann Borshay Liem. It's good to be speaking with each of you about Vivien's Wild Ride, which is a film that just a fascinating, engaging, beautiful documentary that will be shown on PBS's Independent Lens on Monday, January the 26th. So Vivien, welcome to you.
And welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear.
And Deann, welcome to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So this is really Vivien's story. Vivien worked as the writer, director, and producer on the film, and Deann is also the lead producer on the film. But I want to jump right into this with a question for you, Vivien. The very first line in the film is, "I'm really happy I dropped acid in the 60s. So talk about a way to kick off a job interview.
Well, I thought it has to be unpredictable, right?
Absolutely.
And as the first line, it's like, what?
Yes.
It's sort of like, it wakes people up and says, there's going to be a movie coming. And
But what was really wonderful about it, and I'm sure it was purposeful, is that it really kind of so seamlessly and really artfully gives the viewer a heads up that this is a film in large degree about perceptions.
And the perception of what a elder woman is like, or what she would say. And I think that what it did is it really put the context of the time that we're going to go into quite clearly.
Yeah.
And so, and then this beautiful kind of relationship to dropping acid and things like that, and the imagination of those particular times. It kind of sets the time, the tone, and the biggest shock that ever happened in the beginning of a film. So I was quite happy with that, and we went back and forth for a little while on if it's too crazy or whatever. It isn't standard enough or usually used enough. But somebody in the audience who saw it for the premiere said, "Best opening line ever."
Yeah.
So I was happy.
Yeah, well, if the objective is to grab the viewer's attention, you certainly did that. And as I think it was Aldous Huxley who wrote about opening the doors of perception, by way of psychedelics back in the 60s. But on a serious note, Around that time, given the manner in which dropping acid would alter your perceptions, your visual perceptions, etc., did you think of yourself as somebody who was particularly receptive of or sensitive to visual stimuli?
Yes, because I think what it did in the 60s, at least,
Hmm.
I think what it did is create community or a sense of community for me. And then I think that's really helpful for everyone to feel like, even though they don't formally belong to a group or, a community, it includes everybody. It's a very inclusive process because there's such an open heart that happens with, acid and psilocybin and those particular things. So it really does open the areas of perception. Plus, it's about perception about a person that's losing their sight.
Right.
So it has this dynamic kind of pull, I'm hoping, that is talking about these fantastic visions in the middle of seeing, just not having sight or losing sight.
Right.
So I thought that that was like a real dichotomy, and that created that that kind of feeling that this is the opposite of that feeling, but they all are related to one another, in many ways, and it kind of turns it on not being a political statement, but a statement of feeling. And the whole film is like that. It's about feeling rather than making political statements. So I think it brings in a very, the average person, not the exceptional person, but someone who is a little bit on the funny side and doesn't uh, it doesn't have to be a lecture, on eyesight loss or anything. It can be a wild, whimsical kind of fun. And it's how to have fun, really, with sight loss, which I think brings in people and just it includes them.
Sure.
I didn't want to exclude anybody for miraculous deeds that they did. I was a very average kind of a girl who grew up at an exceptional time. And that I very much honor that. And so the film is a lot about creating the mood of the time and the je ne sais quoi, if you will, and feeling North Beach and, all the strip clubs and, nothing was kind of set forward as pat, right? But everything was like subject to interpretation.
Yeah,
And I think
your
that,
film is very much it's autobiographical, but
right.
you quite purposefully and artfully do not take a linear approach to telling your own story. Deann, I'm curious. First of all, I'd love to know how you've come to know Vivien, and when the two of you were consulting around the many layers of this story, what was that collaboration like around telling an autobiographical story, but telling it from the very unique perspective of somebody for whom images is life essentially.
Well, Vivian and I actually first met because I was making a personal documentary about my own life of being an adopted person from South Korea,
Hmm.
adopted by an American family. And I came to Vivian in the late 90s, I think it was 1998 or 99, and asked her to be my editor because I had heard she was this hot, editor, amazing visual, incredible editor. And she immediately said yes. And um, over the course of editing First Person Plural, which was the name of the film, um, I discovered that she had relinquished a baby herself, that she herself had an adoption story. And so that brought us very closely as we were, working together on the film. And I think, I mean, Vivian is a brilliant editor. She's worked on so many narrative films in both sound and picture editing, and then started working with Lourdes Portillo. And so by the time that I met her in the late 90s, she just had an amazing craft and it's just such experience working with images, sound, with music, and it was just pure delight working with her. So when she started losing her sight to macular degeneration and wanted to make her personal film as a directorial debut, I was just, thrilled to work with her, partly just to spend time together.
Sure.
Yeah.
And, because I just love Vivien and we're such good friends. But also just to really help, as she was losing her sight, to help her manifest in a film what she was seeing internally.
Sure.
Um,
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and you capture that so beautifully and so vividly. Let's just back up for a little bit to kind of set the stage for those who have not seen the film, and we'll get a little linear for a second. Vivien, give us some places and dates in terms of, where did you grow up, and what were those circumstances that brought you to San Francisco in the so-called summer of love, or at least
Right.
in that time frame.
Well, I grew up in actually a very suburban neighborhood. And so in fact, I started with the beatniks and the bohemian kind of era. And it was so much fun because it was so different than the suburbs. And
Mhm.
it was so different than the time that was conservative at that time. So it was like this, all of a sudden, this area of freedom opened up. And I just used to love to go to North Beach and hang out with all the people with berets and dark clothing on and things like that. And so that naturally evolved into the hippie kind of world. And that took over like crazy.
Yeah.
And so that was a really interesting community of people where perception was really dominant because of the psychotropics, mainly. And so there were a lot of people who really helped by being who they were, like the bookstores and people like that would really press the bohemian artists and stuff like that. So it was such a shock from and such a liberation from this very conservative type of suburban neighborhood to this wild, crazy North Beach.
Yeah.
And that was just a wonderful revelation. In terms of why be drawn to that area is because there was a revolution going on in film.
Mhm.
And it was drawing Coppola and Lucas and Phil Kaufman and, Carol Ballard and all these extraordinary artists because of the bohemian and the hippie type of thing of free thinking and changing the way things are done. And also, I might add, is, really kind of going not being creating a glass ceiling for women, and that we got hired
Yep.
on all these fantastic films, and it was look one of the largest hiring of women in sound ever in the history of film. And so that is this great combination of these kind of what I call like wildcat sort of um, guys who came in, and then a couple of really great sound supervisors. And we all like jumped into the job and were really good at it. We were able to stay in the job, become a community that really shared rather than competed. So this idea of the community and the opening is really harkens back to this sort of 60s vibe that was happening. So what
Yeah,
was
and
the
some
other
of the
part?
some of the notable members of that community that you mentioned. You mentioned Francis Ford Coppola, if
Right.
folks didn't catch on when you said Coppola, but also Philip Kaufman, who went on to direct The Right Stuff and give us a sense of some of the other players at the time in that group.
Well, there was Never Cry Wolf, and which was exquisite film that was beautiful that I got a chance to work on. And just to go back to Phil Kaufman
You
for
do
a while,
sound or picture on Never Cry Wolf?
sound.
You did sound. The sustaining memory of that film for me is that scene where the guy is woken up by the rush of the caribou.
Oh, yeah. It is a spectacular sound job because Alan Splett, one of the sound geniuses of our time, and there's a recent kind of synopsis of what he did in his life, and it was talking about how usually it's in sound, it's like see a cat, hear a cat, right? Everything is covered, right? Because it's visual, it must mean that it is sound. So he was talking about Alan Splett, who I worked with on Blue Velvet, and it he he did a minimum of sound, but it was able to translate to a feeling that matched the film rather than literally, really making the sound for every single pictorial thing you could see going on in the film. And so what it came across is this incredible marriage that between sound and picture. And there's a quote somewhere that says, 70% of a film is sound.
Hmm.
And it's one of the most important things. So this watching this master do things like reel to reel sound machine, and him slowly running it through with his hand across the sound head, and it sounded like a monster. And what it was in if it was played at 24 or whatever RPM, I've dropped
Revolution
it.
from
Anyway, so yeah, what it really came from was the lovemaking sounds from Kyle MacLachlan and who and
Rossellini.
yeah, not Rossellini, but the one that was really the charming young girl,
Is that Laura Dern?
Laura Dern,
Okay.
uh, when she was much younger.
We're
And so
playing David Lynch trivia.
I know. Sorry, I love David Lynch very much. But anyway, so Alan created this really high bar of what was feeling versus versus literally taking things, and so that it was when sound kind of crossed with being a major part of a score, and San Francisco became known as the sound place, right? It's where sound was going through a revolutionary moment.
Yep.
And so that was fun to be in that because I also specialized in dialogue. And dialogue is when you're closest to the actor and redoing their lines and being able to meet them in the ADR studios and things like that was just magnificent.
Well,
Was
for folks who do
really.
not know, let people know what ADR stands for.
Oh, automatic dialogue recording, but we used to call it abominable audio recording. That was because nobody liked to do ADR because here you are in a studio and it was sort of there was no fertility of this particular studio. Everything was like light up bulbs and mixed room mixed dials and things like that. And then you were supposed to, as an actor, go back to the feeling you had to redo the line because there was a plane riding going over and it was Mozart's time. So they had to reenact something where they had originally the costumes and the all of the sets and everything. And with Milos, he actually played the music of Mozart
This is
when they were
Milos
doing
Forman,
scenes.
the director of Amadeus.
Director of Amadeus, Milos, and so it wherever you went, the Salzans, Skywalker, whatever, they were playing with a new way of inventing sound, and they were like experts at it. So I felt that uh, being able to work in this medium was such a pleasure, such a learning something every day, with it. So
And
anyway,
how
I love the job.
did that developing of your craft as a audio engineer, as a sound editor rather, how did that influence how you approached picture editing?
Well, I had done picture editing on various, when I first started out, I worked on industrials.
Sure.
And industrials are a great way to start up because they are generally terrible. So you're in this milieu, right, of where you feel like, oh my God, this is so bad, I can try anything I want to. And I did, it was very funny, that we played with all kinds of commercials about, how to wrap toilet paper,
Yeah.
right? And all these ridiculous things. So it brought a kind of a laissez-faire kind of feeling to picture editing and having fun with it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I feel is such an important thing about film editing is that along with this story you're telling, you have to have this vibrant this sense of life,
Hmm.
right? And so that's what I tried to do in Never Cry. I mean, sorry, Vivian's Wild Ride. And even in the greatest sadness, there is this humor
Hmm.
that happens that is maybe because of the stress of the whatever we're experiencing at the time that's really difficult, be it relationships or war or things like that. So within that context, I thought we have to make this film expressing all these really complex emotions and at the same time tell the story a kind of a storytelling medium.
Sure.
So I got the whole idea for it, not the whole idea, but part of the idea from working with Lourdes Portillo. And we worked on together was The Devil Never Sleeps. And we had like 15 characters, intercut, all this crazy stuff going on in terms of Mexico and America. And so it allowed my brain to imagine something that was not only multicultural, but also was this wonderful kind of sense of the absurd
Hmm.
that artists had. And so it was such a huge cast in terms of the film itself, and it all held together, right? And
So much
so
of editing, whether it's sound editing or picture editing, is really about taking a whole mass of material and kind of whittling down those fragments and then joining them together. And in a way, as I was watching your film, I was thinking about how, and I think you depict this in your film quite well. That's sort of similar to the way memory works and
mhm.
recollections work. Because, when we think about a time in our life, well, we don't think about, big chunks of weeks and months and years. We think of these little snapshots. And I'm curious, when you came to tell your story as a director, how much of a simulation, essentially, of how memory works did you want to try to depict in your film?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, Deann really helped with this idea of, seeing a transcript and reading it. And if one person likes it, it's okay. If both people like it, you put it in the film. And so it has, there's a lot of experimentation that I did with VWR. And I had to go to some really deep, dark places with this film. And so there was this really difficult kind of considerations that if it's going to be honest, I have to go back to that place every time. It was both in terms of memory, digging up this memory, like in the case of relinquishing my daughter, I had to dig up this memory each time. And then it became a feeling
Right.
more so than anything, a feeling of going dark. Everything goes dark in that particular scene, and just this kind of youthful ignorance of what was going to happen, really, and yet the tragedy of it when I really needed help with not relinquishing my daughter, I didn't get it,
Yep.
and so it comes across as sort of this very sad thing that is this lost opportunity to keep my daughter.
Did
So
you
that's
find that when you were essentially assigning images to communicate these very
Mhm.
complex feelings
Right.
that are many decades old, I'm sure they're
Oh,
recurring,
right,
but they
right.
originated many decades ago. When it came time to assign images, were those images more triggering or were they liberating? That you were able to sort of give an image to this inchoate, collection of emotions.
Well, one of the things that really helps is seeing the photographs
Hmm.
from that time, which always bring back memory. So it was a case of like revisiting through like this particular age or that particular age and taking a look at these photographs like when I was younger and I felt like my mom and dad don't really know how to take care of us, so I'll just step into into being the parent for my brothers and sisters.
Okay.
Um, so that came really from seeing a photograph of my brothers and sisters and me holding one of the kids, and I went, oh, that's right. That's the feeling that I had is like, whoa, our parents are so young, they need help taking care of the kids. So it seeing then another phase where I have like ratted hair and you look crazy. And I go, oh, I remember the feeling of that. So really it is a combination of seeing visual stimuli to memory.
Hmm.
And that really helped a lot. And then there it's just that once in a while I would say like, oh, this is crazy. I don't think I should say this and blah, 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 especially with the adult films. And I went, oh, you have to. It was
Okay,
part of
let's
the
just clear
wild
this up
ride.
for our listeners. You just threw out, especially with adult films, because in addition to the industrials that you edited, the educational films that you edited, you also edited what were known, as adult film pornos, right?
Right.
This is a pre-internet world where you had to like get yourself a raincoat and find the dingy theater in the dingy part of town, correct?
Right. Right. Although it was really top, it was a lot of people got their start there. I just was one of the sequences along the way of my
Exactly.
wild ride.
Right.
But it was, I mainly wanted to find out because I had experienced like the fact of the women's home and being classified as a bad girl
Yeah.
uh, because of that.
This
And,
women's home
and
is a home for unwed mothers, correct?
one mother, sorry. And then I thought, well, if I'm bad, I want to see what these women are really like.
Hmm.
And I met some most extraordinary people, including Doda um, and Carol Doda. Carol Doda. And she was really smart. And some of these other kids were young women were going, trying to pay for their college education. And not all were really, pristine or angel-like, but a lot of them were far more interesting than judging a book by their cover and
Right.
saying, oh, these are all bad girls.
Yeah.
And I love this kind of going into these other kinds of environments, meeting really different types of people and saying, it's we get classified so easily, and it's really sad that we do because there's a lot of interesting people out there that people just don't talk to half of the time or think that they can. So I loved going into that kind of preconceived
Yes.
feel about these women and then finding them to be fascinating, academic in nature and just these wonderful things. And it just so happens they had this job.
Yeah.
And so it was, it opened my eyes to to that. And that's why I wanted it in the film. And I thought, well, everybody's going to laugh, which is better than everybody going, oh, I think that's terrible. Especially with Dingle Dangle and Easy Go, Easy Go, the names of these adult films were really quite funny.
And what was the pseudonym you gave yourself when you were editing these films at Lorraine Sprocket?
Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. That was so great. The name I used was Lorraine Sprocket in these films because, I was willing to, go in terms of meeting everybody and stuff like that. And I thought, oh, my poor parents, they're going to read, my last name. And I'm going, oh, and so I decided to Lorraine Sprocket, which is very humorous to people who work in analog. And
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure of digital.
Yes.
But yeah, anyway, that's why I kind of went into that as a previous experience of being branded really as a type of girl that would get pregnant in high school.
Yeah, it certainly is something that develops empathy and an appreciation for the multiple layers that exist within people.
Right.
Deann, as a filmmaker in your own right, when you're having conversations with Vivien around telling her story and the many, colorful and light and dark and whimsical chapters of her life, how do you arrive at, that sort of right balance between being consultative, between being almost a surrogate for the audience, so to speak, in applying that producer's touch? How did you approach that?
Viv has such a, I mean, I like to say that she lost her sight, but not her vision.
Hmm.
She had such a amazing way of visualizing her inner life and how she was seeing the world. And like one of the first things that Vivien filmed was the roller skating sequence of this young girl roller skating in a roller rink and with these beautiful lights, in the ceiling. And um, when I saw that, I just thought, it's such a beautiful image that speaks to her inner life and the way that she was experiencing both her childhood, but this kind of evolution of her life. And then later, she filmed this labyrinth at the Earl Baum Center for the Blind, and she had it. She did you it was did you actually light candles, Vivien, or
Yes, it
they
were
were battery
battery operated.
candles? How many
Uh, uh,
candles did you end up?
Oh, it was so much fun because I had 500 candles
Yeah.
that I thought I would need a lot, but we just made it around, and they lit up the outline and also the journey within a labyrinth. And I just thought, oh my God, when I first saw it, I imagined it as all of the lights being around this labyrinth and that how that would look with a drone and that it's like I saw it as soon as I saw the labyrinth. And it was wonderful to walk in the daytime, obviously, but at night it became this spectacular journey. And then if you look at it, it becomes the celestial realm, right? Not to sound so, airy fairy, but I saw it before we created it and
Yeah.
I saw this amazing thing. But also, I was halfway through losing my sight. Now, one of the things with macular degeneration is that you see a lot of crazy stuff moving around all the time, which is why a lot of people close their eyes because their eyes just get, tired.
How long ago were you diagnosed with this?
Let's see, the diagnosis went, I would say, about a year before we started the film.
Which would have been when? What year?
Oh boy, that's 6 years, 6 or 7 years ago, 6 years. So it would be about 8 years prior. And
Yeah.
then I slowly lost sight due to some other things other than just macular degeneration. But one of the exceptional things is this exceptional vision that you have. And so it just was like this perfect marriage of imagining crazy stuff
Yeah.
and being able to translate that into what is my imagination and allowing myself to go try to shoot that.
Is this in the neighborhood of that Charles Bonnet syndrome that is
Yes,
referenced in the film? And
it
folks who haven't
yeah.
seen the film, describe what that is.
Well, the Charles Bonnet syndrome is so intriguing, and it was really interesting to me for a really sad reason, and that is I heard from research that men and women would be put in an insane asylum if they described what they saw, which is, oh, I saw, in the case of the film, Mark Twain in a tree. They'd go, that's it. And say the kids would take their grandmother and put her in an insane asylum. And that happened until very recently. I mean, it's just remarkable. I think it was only the 1980s that people started saying, well, that's an eye disease. It could also be insanity, no doubt. But if they tested the eyes of people, they would find out they had macular degeneration. And it is, in one way, a very difficult thing to go around seeing the room move around a lot, and, all kinds of stuff, that patterns and things like that come. And then it takes a lot of energy to put it into reality. Like, this is reality, and I'm keeping all the walls from moving, and I'm keeping the lamps where they are. And it sounds completely Looney Tunes, but it is macular degeneration, the hallucinations. You see it from that perspective. So that perspective is almost advantageous,
Yeah.
right? And I got a chance to talk about how, usually people are locked up for those kinds of visions. So it served both a heartwarming story, and it also served as, like, this is what I'm looking at.
Right.
And I wanted to put that in there because there's people out there who have macular who never talk about it.
What do the medical professionals or neurologists think is happening in that instance? Is the brain trying to send some kind of a signal to the eye? Is there some type of a miscommunication happening either between visual stimuli and the brain's interpretation? What's the sense of that? Do you know?
Well, it's so interesting because with macular, you have peripheral vision, but
Mhm.
you don't have center vision.
Okay.
Now, if you do an experiment and try to look like out of your side vision, you can't because your central vision follows you,
Yeah.
right? And so it is kind of a disease of the central vision that is vision,
Right.
really. And so the peripheral gives you the advantage of always knowing where your environment is, in a way, like where the walls are here.
Right.
But it's fascinating that the ophthalmologists and such don't even address some of these crazy, things that you're looking at. And certainly the craziest of all is Charles Bonnet syndrome.
Yeah.
And for me, it was seeing Mark Twain sitting in a tree. And why? I don't have any idea.
I was going to ask, did you
You
read a
know,
lot of Twain?
no. In fact, it made me want to read Twain, if anything. And, like, how did I know what Mark Twain looked like? I don't know. I have no idea
Was he
where
wearing
obvious.
seersucker?
What's that?
Was he wearing seersucker?
Yeah, he was wearing white and the perfect hat. And I have a friend, Gary Weinberg, and I said, "Would you be Mark Twain for a day?" And he goes, "Oh, I'd love to." And so he found the right kind of whitish, beigeish kind of suit and
Yeah.
the perfect hat.
Yeah.
And we did a blue screen and put him in the tree. But afterwards, I got a call from him. This is so fascinating. And he said, playing the part of Mark Twain made me want to read all his books.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was so funny. And he said he was a wonderful writer. And he was going on and on about how he's an anti-racist. And I said, isn't that marvelous? It's sort of, he got something out of it too. And hoping that the audience got a sense of, like, oh, Aunt Margaret or Great Aunt Bunny or, whoever it is, she's suffering from a eye disease,
Mm.
not being Looney Tunes. And
Right.
it's surprising how many people still don't know, because it's never mentioned by your ophthalmologist.
Hmm.
The fact that you're about to go into this acid trip and everything is kind of moving around. So, and it also, just is one of those things people don't talk about because they're very worried about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine
Yeah.
that, somebody who hasn't had a life like yours, where you're immersed not just in images, but in little snippets of images. So,
Yeah.
in a way, does your brain have a preset that
Hmm.
doesn't get alarmed necessarily by, these discordant array of little images that maybe somebody else who, say was maybe an accountant and they start having flashes of images and they don't know what the source could be, they might be a little bit more alarmed than someone who's made a craft and a career out of, creating cohesion amongst these snippets of images.
Absolutely. And I think it's been a great advantage that I work in a visual field while losing vision.
Yeah.
And that is the dichotomy of this, because I think it really helped being a visual person, for 57 years,
Yeah.
and how hard it must be for people experiencing this for the first time without having a context
Right.
of the time or the science
Yeah.
behind it. I had several ophthalmologist and also a person who works with the blind, give it sort of a seal of approval, right? I didn't want to kind of say, well, it happens to me, but nobody else, because I'm crazy. But I found the most interesting thing I heard was that we are built with senses, like the sense of smell and the sense of touch and the sense of taste and things like that. The eyes are one of the few things that go directly to your brain.
Hmm.
They are not a sense as much as part of the brain.
Uh-huh.
And now that really makes sense to me, because I was like, whatever was happening with my brain, in terms of losing sight, I feel like in many ways, my brain got bored of seeing nothing, like through my central vision. So my brain probably made up this wonderful show and this crazy kind of stuff that happened because I was used to that by having been a child at the 60s.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it is much harder for people who are, just not that visual, or afraid to talk about things in the open.
And
And
what is
I was
the
hoping that this film actually brings a lot of people together, the families of people who are losing sight and the people themselves. It's like they can talk about it for the first time.
what is the state of your vision right now as we speak today?
I can't see any of your faces. I can't read. Um, so I miss being able to see people's faces,
Okay.
because I find myself like talking just off kilter a little bit. And I've trained myself to look at people as if I'm looking at their eyes, because I know where their head is.
Okay.
And I only do that. So I'm compensating for being blind, which is not a great thing. It should be that I am blind and that's okay.
Yeah.
Uh, since I look away a little bit, people will start talking to Karen rather than me, because they don't think I'm making eye contact. So I just thought, well, I'm going to just pretend I have eye contact. And people, sometimes the reaction is they don't really believe that I can't see.
Interesting.
And it's interesting to me, because I thought it wasn't quite honest learning how to track people's heads and imagining where their eyes are. So now I just let myself just look all over the place and they can just get over it, basically.
So here, okay, so I have a pretty pragmatic couple of questions. You're putting together a film. So Deann, talk to me about conversations with Vivien, where Vivien's the director of this film, and she's a director of this film who is losing her eyesight, right? And so, did you have conversations, and what would happen if these conversations took place, where what Deann is seeing in a rough cut isn't what Vivien thinks was there? And how did you go about having those types of conversations?
Well, first, as a producer, to finish kind of the thought that I had earlier, Viv, because there was just an abundance and kind of overflow of the images that Viv was seeing and wanted to recreate for the film, my job was really to create a sort of a container, in terms of the producing side, make sure that the budget was there, that things were moving along on time, and paperwork was done because, with eyesight and not being able to read was getting harder. And so all of those things, was sort of, I felt like was my job to free up Viv so that she could make the film that she wanted to make. Um, we did have a lot of conversations about the film, both the visuals, the storyline, the kind of narrative arc, and did have some disagreements and things, not so much disagreements, just things that I, saw that, that I was encouraging and that she didn't want to do. And,
True.
and ultimately, I feel like, as a producer, I really wanted to support her vision for the film and her voice.
Yeah.
So I put out my ideas and feelings and put it out there, And then we had lots of really intense, deep conversations. And, there were some hard
Mhm.
times because, you asked about memory, and whether memories can be triggering or somehow, enable you to, reconcile the past. And I think that, um, going back into hard periods of one's life can really be tough. And when you have to experience those things in real time while you're at the same time trying to write about it and create a piece of art around it, it's really hard.
Yeah.
So, I think I think I served as a sounding board for Viv. I hope you agree with that, Viv. And, that just being there for her to be able to just be herself and experience what she was going through and be there both, as a producer and as a friend.
I could have never finished this film. I could have never got anywhere near half this film if it wasn't for you, Deann. And I had a huge respect for the films that you had made that were very difficult, like first person plural. So I just trusted you, and I love the kind of a tug that we had it sometimes. It's a very honest thing when you sit down and you actually argue with someone, and you had these really great ideas, and you had this personal experience with loss that
Mhm.
I really respected. And there's no way I could have done this film without you. I mean, I think you're brilliant, number one. I think that I sometimes said, there's no fucking way I'm going to do this. And I ended up doing it because you were there. You
That's
were
a good
there, and you
producer.
were you were a bond of safety while I was, diving into this deep, dark, kind of hard space. And thank God you were there.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
all.
I
I
think the
love you.
year I love you too. I think the years that we've worked together, Viv, you've said this before that editing and working with a director, in some ways it's closer than, a partner or a husband or wife because, as a director, you're laying yourself bare creatively. You're saying things, you're experimenting with things, and you're really exposing your vulnerabilities. And as an editor, you're working with those vulnerabilities, right? And so I went
Right.
through this process with Viv in First Person Plural and two other films that Vivian edited.
Mhm.
And laying myself bare and being vulnerable and just really digging into the dark spaces that I've been in my life.
Mhm.
And Viv held those spaces for me as an editor with such love and care. I'm gonna get emotional, but she just was so amazing.
It really is the ultimate compliment that each of you can pay the other in the sense that you each provided that space, as you say, Deanne, for the other to be honest in all of its
Yes,
manifestations, the joys, the
exactly.
sorrows, the
Yes.
parts of
And
yourself that you maybe hide from others.
yes. And in as an editor, when she worked on my film, she really did push me to be honest. And when you're making a personal film, you can say a lot of inaccuracies about yourself
Mhm.
that people may not pick up on. And you really have to check yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
And because you can say things that aren't true and people would never know.
Right.
And the task really is to really say with, the minimum amount of words and the right visual imagery and sound and everything that is true, like
Mm.
really true. And Vivian, when I worked with her as an editor, she would really push me to say what was real, what was true. And that was just an amazing thing that she did for me as an editor and with such generosity and love. And so working with her as a director, I could see her struggle with similar things, like really tapping into her experience of what's true, what's real, what's really honest, and how vulnerable can you really be with an audience, and undergoing those things while creating the film and directing the film and all of that. So It's really, yeah, I'm just so proud of the film and Vivien and the journey that has been this film.
Mm.
It's not been easy, and it's just wonderful to see it now, on a national PBS broadcast
Yeah.
and to be able to share it with the world.
Yeah, and Deanne, you mentioned a little while back about, Vivien's voice. So, and Vivien's literal voice narrates the film. And Vivien, I just have to say, among the many things I really enjoyed about your film was your narration is just, it couldn't be more perfect. It really truly feels like you're just sitting down with someone and they're telling you this story. It doesn't feel like a top-down, voice of God narration where, and then in 1974, you're taking people, you're not just taking them by the hand, as we said earlier, in doing this linear biographical thing. You're interweaving kind of a bifurcated or trifurcated story of your life where we're in the current day, but then we're going back to when you were a child or when you were growing up. But it's your seamless narration and storytelling abilities that I really think they pair with the visuals so perfectly.
You are very kind. One of the first things when we were in the rough cut that people on the outside, never with Deann, said the worst thing about this film is your voice, it's your narration, and it ended up. You know how it is. You spend so much time on the things that aren't good that they eventually end up good. And I think that I owe so much to Deann because there's this great saying is it's vulnerability is my source of strength.
Mm-hmm.
And it just gives me chills every time I think of it. And Deann was so vulnerable in first person plural in her other films. And I just felt like I had a comrade in terms of someone having, deep dived in this very similar kind of way of loss and having to do with children and adoption, the sort of the adoption triad. And it is such a big part of the film uh, that I have to say the diving part of it was so helpful with Deann,
Yeah.
and the fact that I really trusted her,
Yep.
because she'd been there.
I kind of feel like our conversation has mirrored a bit your film because we have jumped back and forth, and I feel like folks who haven't seen the film are thinking, well, wait a minute, is this a film about a film editor who has
Oh,
macular degenerative disease and she's losing her sight, or is it a film about a woman who gave up a child for adoption and then has to find her, or is this a film who about a woman who's coming of age in the late 60s? And my answer is yes. It's
yes.
Yes,
And you
all
exactly.
of those
That is the
things.
answer.
right, absolutely. It is all those things that are like a mosaic, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have
Of
to say it's such a joyful film and it's real and it's raw and it's beautiful. And I really encourage folks to see it. It's Vivien's Wild Ride. It'll be premiering on PBS on January the 26th on the Independent Lens series. So I have to ask you, is there a plan for it to be available beyond PBS? In other words, will folks be able to stream it? After the premiere date what's the plan
Yes.
with
The film premieres on January 26th, and then it'll stream for free on PBS through April. And
Wonderful.
then for educators, the film's available for educators and for community organizations that would like to screen it. It's available on Good Docs.
The other thing I was thinking about in terms of community organizations that really should see this film is anybody who's reached that point in their life. And, it varies for people. Some people, this feeling kicks in when they're 40, other people, it kicks in when they're 80, but where they feel like, oh, I've just got too many challenges to face. I'm going to just wave the white flag. This film is so inspirational, I think, around that, Vivien, there have been no shortage of challenges in your life, but there has also been no shortage of instances where you just dug a little deeper, feeling confident that something within you was going to allow you to get over that hump.
I think a sense of hope is huge in this particular time, and also it is very very due to this incredible team that I got to work with. I mean, an extraordinary team, and we've all kind of gone through a lot of stuff in our lives. So there was really this mature kind of viewpoint
Right.
that was happening. And what I love about it is the act. It is also a story about aging. And it is such an interesting kind of where you find like it's very reflective time. It's a time that, you're slowing down a little bit. And all those things bring about a space where you are seeing things for the first time. I'm seeing at an age of, I'm going to turn 80 this year. At this particular age, I'm seeing, oh, I never noticed that bush before, that it has these beautiful red berries. That's because I'm not going, okay, how are we going to finish this film? And all that kind of stuff. And the fast-paced world of, I would say, both computers and film.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot out of you in many ways, but it gives you, this beautiful way of a perception about things, that you didn't have before. So it's, you hold the joy and the sadness, as I say in the film, equally.
Absolutely.
And that is the beauty of life.
Yes, and it's a beautiful film. And again, it's Vivien's wild ride. And thank you both for your time, and thank you for this film. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.
All of these lines across my face tell you the story of who I am. So many stories of where I've been, and now I got to where I am. But these stories don't mean anything when you've got no one to tell them to. It's true, I was made for you. I climbed across the mountain top